So, welcome to the First Brian for Liberty podcast. This is Brian, your host, and the only person on the show because it's my first podcast and I don't have guests yet. I am just reaching out here to get this thing launched and get started. And I know that this is not the best time to launch a podcast. I know there's a lot of serious things going on out there, and there's a lot of people worried. The first thing I want to say is that I hope you're all staying safe out there, and I hope that you're getting the care you need if you need it. The other thing I want to bring up is one of the things I've been seeing a lot on social media is there's a lot of anger from people like myself, who are libertarian, who think that the government is overreaching and overstepping, and that in the face of a crisis, that the government is choosing to suspend significant rights. I understand that as a libertarian, I understand very well that crises is the enemy of liberty. That when a crisis happens, government always sees this as an opportunity to expand its power, to do more things, to be doing things that it probably shouldn't be doing. In this circumstance, I would say I side with government a little bit on this one. I would say that there is a role for government. I am not an anarchist. I do believe there's a role for government. I do believe there's a role for organization. And I think that we are overlooking the potential dangers of coronavirus when we are encouraging people to believe that this is being overblown or this is simply being used as an excuse to control people. Now, I'm not saying it's not being used as an excuse to control people. Let's be clear. This is always a crisis is a great excuse for government to expand itself. That's just the truth. You look at 9/11, every crisis we've ever had, you've ended up with long structural changes that have increased the power of government. So we have to be very cautious and we have to make sure that what we're dealing with here are temporary measures and not permanent structural changes to the way government interacts with the people. That being said, there are also a lot of unqualified opinions out there. And I will tell you right now that my opinion is also unqualified. I am not a virologist. I am not a person who studies these things. I don't have the knowledge to say this is being overblown, this is not being overblown. But what I will tell you is that I'm not making a political statement here. And I think that a lot of the opinions you're hearing on the internet are basically just political opinions. I don't like the government, and therefore, I've seen a lot of Trump supporters coming out saying that this is something that the Democrats are intentionally blowing out of proportion in order to make Trump look bad, that they're doing this to intentionally tank the American economy, so to hurt his reelection opportunities. I think that is ridiculous on its face. I think that the idea that all these countries are all these countries faking so that Donald Trump doesn't get reelected, it's a ridiculous thought. So let's calm down with the political rhetoric. And then let's take a look at what this disease is. One of the arguments that we're hearing is that this is no worse than the seasonal flu, or that this is H1N1, or that we've had all these fears and all these issues with virulent strands in the past, and we've always overreacted, but we've never gone this far. And I don't understand why all of a sudden in an election year now we're taking these drastic steps. We have had these scares in the past, and that's understandable that it seems like we're reacting much stronger. But I think when you look at how this virus is spread, and when you look at the hospitalization rate of people who get ill, and you look at its fatality rate, you have to take this and say this isn't the flu because this is going to spread faster than the flu. We don't have vaccinations. We don't have an immunity to this. So this does have the potential to spread much faster than some of the other things that we've dealt with in the past. Furthermore, because of the high rate of hospitalization, between 10 and 15%, it's very important that we flatten the curve. Some of you may have be hearing this expression out there that we have to flatten the curve. And you may be wondering what that means. Flattening the curve simply means that there is going to be widespread coronavirus infections. That's kind of a given already. Containment's over. So what we're trying to do, what government is trying to do, and by taking these drastic steps, is that they're trying to reduce the speed at which this spreads. So if you look at the flu season and peak flu season, you're looking at an 8-month infection rate. The seasonal flu is a long, slow process to work its way through the population. What we're concerned with, what our governments are concerned with, is that this is going to spread much more rapidly than the flu. And as a result, it can overwhelm the healthcare system. I think you can see very clearly what's going on in Italy, where they are making some very difficult choices, as this has vastly exceeded their healthcare capacity to keep up with it. And they're literally having to make choices about who they will and will not care for. We don't want to be facing those kinds of decisions here in the United States. I think that we're taking appropriate steps. I think that people should be smart. I think that you should stay home. Let's not pound our chests and be rebels to get out there and just to prove that we're free people and we're not going to let the government tell us what to do. There are moments in time when we have to listen to authority and do what is in the best interest of our fellow man, because liberty is also about responsibility, and it's about responsibility to your fellow man. And so we have to make sure that we're not exposing people unnecessarily to risk. Furthermore, in regards to the coronavirus, and this will kind of be the last point I want to make on it, and then I want to move on to kind of an introduction of what this podcast is really going to be about. With the coronavirus, we want to make sure that we are not overreacting in terms of fear. I know that there's a lot of fear out there. I know that we're taking unprecedented steps, and I know that people are very, very concerned. But we have to be calm, and we have to be rational. We have to understand that the food supplies are going to keep moving, that in a couple of weeks there's going to be hand sanitizer back on the store shelves, and that we're not going to be in a scenario where we are not able to get the things that we need. Okay? And the reason that that's important is because right now, as I've gone to the store over the last couple of days, and yes, I have bought some extra things just to make sure that we have some things in the house, but I've not hoarded an unusual amount of food, of medical supplies, of hand sanitizer, or of any of those things. You have to leave some things on the shelf for the next guy. And this isn't just about charity or kindness or responsibility to your fellow man. If you're taking the hand sanitizer and the next guy in line doesn't have access to it, that's one less person that's able to take the proper steps to protect himself, him or herself, I should say. And what that means is you're increasing the odds that this will spread. If I don't have access to the proper sanitation, if I can't sanitize my hands when I have to, when I am forced to go out in public, then I have a better chance of picking this virus up, and then I have a better chance of passing it on to the next person. Take what you need. Understand that you're going to be back in the grocery store or back in the stores in a couple of weeks, and the shelves will be stocked. It's irresponsible to take a 6-month supply of hand sanitizer when it's going to be back on the shelves in 2 weeks. We need to make sure that this is in the hands of as many people as possible. So hoarding these supplies is not a good move. And I just want people to think about that and think about the next person in line and think about the fact that you're buying this to prevent the spread. And to prevent the spread, we want as many people to have access to these supplies as possible. So that is my take and what I had to say about the coronavirus. I'm not going to linger on it. There are plenty of unqualified opinions out there. Try and ignore those. There are certainly plenty of qualified opinions of people who can guide you better. Listen to the doctors, listen to your experts in the fields, and follow their advice. Stay inside, avoid unnecessary travel. So that's all I have to say about that. So in regards to this particular podcast, I kind of have been working on this for a while. This is an idea that kind of popped into my head a while back, and I've been trying to figure out how to get this out and kind of express it properly for a couple of months now. And it finally kind of all came together here just a few weeks ago, and I've been working on some material and working on content and looking forward to getting it out. But as a libertarian, I've run for office twice as a libertarian. And when I have been out talking to people, I think that everybody would say that there's a strong desire in this country for a third political party, that the two-party system is broken, that it's not functioning properly. I think we hear these things all the time. I think the 2016 election certainly clarified that. We had the two least popular presidential candidates who've ever run for office squaring off. I don't think the 2020 election is going to be any better when I think we're going to be faced with Joe Biden, who's certainly not the most popular Democrat, once again running against Donald Trump, and we all know how a lot of the country feels about Donald Trump. So we're going to have another election where it looks like we don't have great choices, and we're faced with this two-party system, and we don't know what to do. And you're a libertarian, it's can be very frustrating because you're saying, I'm giving you another option, I'm giving you another opportunity, a place where you can go and walk away from this two-party system. But people don't take that opportunity. Even people who agree. I think there's a lot of progressive liberals in this country who don't like the Libertarian Party because they view us as a party that wants no social safety nets. They don't want government providing for the people, et cetera, et cetera. And so it's their natural inclination to walk away from the Libertarian Party when we say things like taxation is theft, which of course it is. But it's their natural inclination to not listen to us because they value the institution of government so much that they can't possibly bring themselves, even though they want a third party, they can't possibly bring themselves to vote for a party who appears to differ from them so much. The interesting thing about the Libertarian Party is that we, as a party, I think libertarians in general need to recognize that political action is most likely not the way we're going to change the political landscape in this country. I think a lot of time and energy and effort goes into campaigns, a lot of money goes into campaigns. I think we spend a lot of time discussing political strategy. If you look at it, the results haven't changed. You're going to get, you're going to have a very good year if you get 5% on the presidential election. Your local elections, like the one I ran in, you're going to end up anywhere from 2 to 5%. You may do better if you're in a two-party race as opposed to facing both a Republican and a Democrat. But at the end of the day, the Libertarian Party is just never going to break through that barrier of the two-party system. And I think the reason for that is pretty clear. And the reason for that is that the American people are terrified. The American people are terrified of what would happen if their political enemies were to come to power. And that's an interesting perspective, and it's an interesting thing to think about. They want to leave the system, but they're afraid of what's going to happen if they do. If I vote for this third party candidate, then am I opening the door to my candidate losing? And if I am, go ahead and name the issue. Is it an abortion? Is it gun control? Is it, gerrymandering? Is it the border? Is it whatever the issue is, whatever the issue that the media has really gotten us worked up over and has really got us going on? That's those 2 or 3 key issues. If you really think about it, it's about 2 or 3 key issues that we absolutely cannot walk away from our party, because if I can't lose those issues are just core to me. I have to win in those areas. The interesting thing is that government doesn't change that much based on who's in power. So it has to focus on a couple of very divisive, very hot button issues, because historically speaking, government's going to function relatively the same no matter who's in power. We're still going to dedicate the largest portion of our budget outside of Social Security and Medicare is still going to go to the military. You're still looking at almost $1 trillion or $1 trillion plus dollars, depending on what you want to include in military and defense spending. You're looking at well over $1 trillion, at or over $1 trillion, depending on how you come to the costs. And you look at that's 50% of the income taxes, Clay. We pay into the system about $2.3 trillion in income taxes. So you take out $1 trillion of that for military spending. Then there's another 400, and I think this year's projected amount is $498 billion is going to get spent just on the interest on the debt. So now you've got about $800 billion left over. Out of that, you're going to pay for the Department of Education, the Department of Agriculture, and Department of Transportation, and so on and so forth. And when you start looking at out of your income taxes, what's left over to take care of the American people is scraps. It's nothing. The government isn't taking care of you. They're not using your money to serve you. They're sending a massive amount of money back over to the banks, and they're sending a ton of money. Really, in the greatest subsidy for oil companies ever, the U.S. military, which keeps oil prices unnaturally low by engaging in the Middle East and keeping the flow of oil open there, even though the United States gets very little of its oil from the Middle East. That's a topic for another podcast. The point of this podcast, the point of the introduction, and what I'm trying to get at here is that political action is largely irrelevant because the government's not really going to change no matter who's in power. And I don't feel like the Libertarian Party is in a position to ever take enough of a majority away from the two-party system to initiate any actual change. Now, if you're a libertarian and you're listening to this, it's probably upsetting to you. Maybe I'm a traitor to the Libertarian Party, but the direction I think just needs to change. The Libertarian Party needs to show people in action how we can better serve each other locally and one on one, and by reaching out and helping our neighbors, than by trying to engage in political activity. That's just my opinion. I mean, like I said, the idea that a third party is ever going to have enough power to really change the way that Washington operates or Washington or any individual state is going to operate is relatively far-fetched. So if you really want to think about it, the best thing you could do is try and displace government to the greatest possible extent. When you think about the things people want government to do, especially when I think we think about the progressive left, we say we need to take care of people. We need to provide them with medical care. We need to provide them with food. We need to provide them with shelter. We need to do all these different things. When you look at the efficiency level of charity versus the efficiency level of government, charitable giving is a much, much better avenue than the government when it comes to taking care of people. And at the end of the day, while we spend $2.3 trillion of our income taxes go directly to the federal government, less than 500 billion of that's coming back to the population in terms of how we're going to help people. And of that 500 billion, about 30 cents on the dollar actually makes it through all the inefficiencies of government and gets to the people that it's needed. Now, in 2018, we donated as a population 500 and I want to say the number is $579 billion to charity, and on average a charitable donation comes back directly to the people that it's meant to help to the tune of about 70 cents on the dollar. So not only is charity already spending as much to help people as government is, and again, I understand Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and we're definitely going to get into those topics in later podcasts. But when you're talking about how much money is being spent by the government on the people, and you compare the inefficiency of government with the efficiency of charity, we'd be much better off redirecting our efforts to charitable organizations than to political organizations. And if you are a supporter of a candidate, if you are a supporter of a party, Republican, Democrat, Libertarian, Green, you have to ask yourself, when you're sending that $50 or that you're making that donation, when you're volunteering your time to go and knock on doors and do those kinds of things, how much are you actually helping? What do you want to accomplish? What's your goal? I think when you look at Bernie Sanders supporters, they say there's a bunch of people out there without access to medical care. And we're going to get medical care, and Medicare for All is going to be the first topic. I'm going to do a piece on it this weekend. It'll be on the podcast. It'll be on the YouTube channel. We're going to have a long conversation about medical care, Medicaid, Medicare, how we got here, how to solve the problem, why the European system, while it may look good to us from afar, is not the system we need to be implementing in the United States, and how can we fix our medical issues. So we're going to be talking about that. This Saturday is when I plan on putting that podcast out. But we need to start looking at alternatives to government to solve our problems. There's a couple of reasons for that, not just the increased efficiency of charities over government, but also we have to recognize that our federal government is $23 trillion in debt. And you can see that the checks are being written faster than you can imagine now that we're facing another crisis. Spending cuts are not going to be made in other places to cover this cost. We're not going to reduce our military budget to cover these costs. So these are just things that are going to get added to the deficit. It's going to increase the burden of the debt as it is part of our budget. In 9 years, the debt payments are expected to reach $1 trillion a year. So we all have to recognize that there's going to be a point where we can't look to the federal government and say the federal government needs to do this and needs to do that. We're in an era where politicians seem to be knocking each other over, talking about all the things that the federal government's going to be able to do for them. They're lining up to give stuff away. And this is not just a Democrat thing. This is also a Republican thing. Donald Trump ran on $1.5 trillion in infrastructure spending. Donald Trump has not shrank the budget. He's going to cut all these taxes, but we're going to spend as much money. That doesn't work. So if you look historically from Trump to Obama to Bush, you're running these massive deficits every year. You keep adding to the debt. There's no discipline on either side of the aisle to rein in spending or to rein in these massive deficits. So there's going to be a point where it's just not it's just not sustainable anymore. Math doesn't have a political party. Economics doesn't have a political party. Okay, there's going to be a point where the burden of handling our debt, of making those debt payments, which is a mandatory part of our budget, and providing all these public services and having the federal government be involved in all these other things is just going to become untenable. And when that happens, there's going to be spending cuts. There's going to be reductions in services. There's going to be cuts in Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid. These things are coming, and we can pretend that they're not, but they are. So it's really important to start building that infrastructure outside of government and saying, how can I help? What can I do? Should I send $50 to Bernie Sanders or Donald Trump or Joe Biden, or should I send it to St. Jude's? Right? We have to start thinking about where we're deploying our discretionary income and how we're working to displace government and put together an infrastructure that's going to function when these things start coming to fruition, when the reality of our mathematical, our economical situation starts coming to fruition, how have we prepared to handle that? So that's kind of what the point of this podcast. We're going to be talking a lot about how government is wasting our money, how they're not serving the public. We're going to go through a lot of different topics. This is the first one, so it's been a little, maybe a little rough. Hopefully I'll keep getting better at it, and hopefully some people will start tuning in. But at this point, I just wanted to give an introduction, and my focus is going to be to turn people away from government towards charities, and see what kind of good and what kind of impact we can make in the world outside the political process. I think that we'll find that if we can work in that realm as opposed to the political realm, we're going to find out that as a people, Americans have a lot more in common than what tears us apart, and that we have very many of the same goals um, as the people that we would think maybe approach politics in a very different way than we do, but they have the same goals, the same intentions that we do. So that's where we're going to be going with this podcast. This Saturday will be the Medicare for all. We're going to talk about the history of healthcare in the United States. How did we get into this situation? With the issues with pre-existing conditions and third-party payers and uninsured, and how did this all happen? We're going to talk about why the European system works well for them, but not necessarily work as well for us. And then we're going to talk about some real solutions to our system and how we might be able to make healthcare more affordable and more accessible for everyone. Thank you all for tuning in, and I will see you on Saturday.